Pansies give us a wonderful variety of colour, so I'm going to use them for my workshop on colour mixing and bleeding. I'm Sally Pinhey. Find my work on sallypinhey.com. Here are our specimens for today, and this is the initial drawing of them on 224 grams recycled paper. Chosen for its absorbency, I've also stretched it. Details of how to stretch are in my book, The Botanical Illustrator's Handbook. The absorbency of this paper will help to bleed the colours, but it will lose some of the vibrancy of the colour and also be difficult to push the pigment around once it's settled in. This is a number 4 sable brush with a fine point, and the belly holds plenty of water and the point shows me exactly where I'm putting it. Now this is Windsor Yellow. I've chosen it for its vibrancy. It'll make a good base and we can add tone to it later with the detail. I call this leaving tonal space because every detail you put on darkens it up. You need to work quite quickly here because any additional pigment has to go in onto the damp and into the damp, and if you want the colours to blend, they'll need to do it while the page is still wet. Your shadow colour for yellow is of course violet, and I'm going to use a tiny bit here just to define the edge. Ideally I would like to be able to hold the brush so that I can see the tip of it, and I will be working away from myself with the tip. Unfortunately the camera's in the way, but you will work always so that you can see the tip of your brush and keep out of trouble that way. Tube paint is necessary for this kind of work, and you need it for speed because you need to get the colour off very quickly while your page is still wet, and also for density because you've got a lot of paint to apply and you need to get it on quite thickly so that it doesn't cause run back in the existing wet on the page. We will use a little bit of cadmium later, but here we have the yellow, violet, magenta, quinacridone and brown madder, and a tiny bit of neutral tint and cobalt blue. Here you see what looks like a rather unpromising start, but I hope to show you how what looks pretty severe on a page to start with can drop back as the additional tones are added to your page. Wetting carefully again here will give you a good crisp edge. And then watch it soak in just for a little bit, so that it's then ready and not swilling about when you want to add your pigment. I've turned the page so that I can see the tip of the brush this time, and you need to remember if you turn your page that your light source has also changed. So if you're used to working with the light coming from the opposite side from your working hand to create your shadows, it is now reversed. You have to bear this in mind because if your shadows come from different directions, it will flatten your painting more than necessary. I know pansies are fairly flat anyway, but you need all the help you can get. Then while it's still wet, you can get your colour in. There's a lot of colour in here, and though the base is definitely violet, there's also a bit of magenta and quinacridone red, and they're gorgeous colours, so just enjoy dropping them in, making sure that as you do so the pigment that you're putting on is always thicker and less wet than the pigment on the page. You can go on building this up as long as you like, and the thicker you get it, the more dense and velvety your colour will become. I think that's a bit of magenta there now. Leave a little bit of space around the edge because it will bleed out quite a bit, so you need to leave yourself quite a bit of yellow there for it to bleed into. And of course the yellow itself will slightly change the colour as well, and that's why your yellow pansies tend to look a bit browner. Quinacridone red now. Gorgeous colours. And now you see how the blob that we started off with that looked so unpromising is now dropping back. We can do the same on the white, and although you can't see it, I have wetted this area, and this is a mixture here of magenta and violet going on. It may be a little bit too red, but we can make adjustments as we go on. This is all going to become much denser in colour anyway when we add the veins and so on. That crisp line on the left is where the white petal overlaps the coloured one. And you can see that the drier pigment is now creeping its way out into the damp white petal. Now we need to show some of the crinkles on the edge of the white petals, and so that needs to be damp again. So this is just literally brushing it. It doesn't need to be very wet, just enough to take and blur the edges of the veins as you draw them out. And if you leave it for just a few seconds then before you start to put the veins in, then the water will settle into the surface of the page again. If you look carefully at your pansy, you'll see that the dark veins do go right from the centre to the outside, right through that wonderful blotch of colour. So we'll see if we can do that. Again, you need your brush at a comfortable angle to do this. And you need also to watch your specimen to make sure that you don't just go into the habit of doing everything mechanically, because that then will spoil the natural look of the flower. So pay close attention to your model at this stage. Now we're going to show the overlap of the petals, which will give this white flower shape. There we go. And this is a purpley sort of grey. We may go for a greener grey later, where the green from the foliage may be showing through. Don't forget that everything dries lighter. You've left everything white in the centre so that you can put your centre in. Take a good look again at your pansy and note that there are 3 stamens and 1 stigma in the centre of each, and they need to show. The lumpy bits round the edge that sometimes have little hairs on them are the nectaries. And the centre of this white pansy is quite a pale green. Some of the stigmas have a little bit of flash of red on the end too. Very important to get it in. It gives that little bit of depth to your pansy face, and also it's important botanically. The yellow one has a darker centre, which makes it a little bit harder to see, but it's well worth looking right into it. You can see I have laid some quite thick yellow round the edge. Gives it a crisp edge and also a little bit of three-dimensionality there, where you do have slight lumpiness in the flower itself. It goes without saying that this is small brush work, and this is a 000 that I'm using here, and drawing actually with the tip of the brush, which is finer than you would probably get an ordinary pencil. Also then, of course, you don't have to rub it out afterwards. This thick yellow will take a long time to dry, and you certainly don't want it smeared everywhere. While that's drying, we'll do some of the edges of the white, and you can see that the shadow is on the away from light side on each little pleat, has one crisp edge and one soft edge. So after you've put in the harder edge, then drag out your line into the body white of the petal with a damp brush. You have to do this fairly quickly before it hardens into the page. I started the foliage with an all-over pale green wash to build on, and then can work up the tones so that the shadow underneath each flower will show the flower up nicely. Use the same technique as you have with everything else by damping in small areas so that your paint will flood in. You can keep the hard lines where there's a hard edge and tease out your pigment into the body colour of the rest of the leaf where you don't want a line. You can treat all the shadows like this, leaving small areas where either you don't want the paint to mix just yet, or where you want a hard edge. And where you want to intensify the shadow, drop it into the already damp pigment on the page, and then you won't have to adjust it. Don't forget that your shadow colour for green is red, and also a little bit of blue will help to intensify your shadow colours. There's the little dark dot where the leaf curves away. The stem joins it just there, and it is invisible, curving away behind. All the leaves are like this. The top one here is lighter, and you may want to put a little bit of sheen on it. Where you want a silvery sheen, an underwash of a very pale blue would help that. Where your veins are dark, you can shape the leaf freely and add the dark veins later with a very fine brush. Where they're light, you need to paint between the veins to leave the light wash underneath showing through. But you can still get a sheen going across the veins. Don't forget that where an overlap shadows, the shadow will apply equally to the vein as it does to the rest of the leaf. You won't have a stark, pale line going right through the shadow. Here I'm painting between the veins to leave a very fine white line. It's easier to make a very fine line by not painting it than it is by painting it, so that's a good method. Take out the very edges of your veins as well when you get to the edge of the leaf, because it's unlikely that you'll be able to do it fine enough to be properly in scale with the rest of the vein. It's better that it doesn't show at all. So don't have your white vein go, your pale vein go right to the very edge of the leaf. These areas between the veins have been damped so that the paint doesn't harden too quickly. And there you can see each one going in on the edge, and then right up close to the main rib. Do that in a minute. There. And then with a completely clean damp brush, merge the two areas, leaving the area of sheen cutting across the veins in the middle. And then when you've done that, you can intensify the shadow underneath the petal. This is also where you get your little dark hole where the stem is attached, and that also creates a valley which you can tease out the dark to help shape the rest of the leaf. Hope that makes sense if you can actually see what's happening there. There's still a lot of detail to work in. You may want to tidy up your veins with a very small dry brush, and there's a lot of work still I see to do to the bottom of the yellow pansy, but I'll show you how to do that on the white one where the shadows show up better. So we're going to define the edge of this petal better with a line of shadow, pulling it out onto the rest of the petal, and then we're going to put in some pleats along the edge with a harder line nearer the top of the shadow side and a softer line or a softer edge as the shadow pulls away. You also need a little bit of shadow on the underside of each of the pleats. Practicing all this is huge fun, but don't worry if it doesn't work out right first time. Thank you for watching and enjoy your painting.